Dear friends, welcome to a story unlike any other. A true account of a young woman whose calm voice stirred a nation, and whose gentle presence sparked a fire of contemplation in the hearts of many. This is not just a story about debates. It's about courage, conviction, and a moment that turned a Canadian TV studio into a chamber of spiritual awakening. Her name was Aaliyah Morin, a 22-year-old Muslim woman born and raised in Toronto. With a serene face, soft manners, and a quiet presence, Aaliyah didn't seem like the kind of person who could make a room fall silent with a single sentence. But what no one could see was the ocean of knowledge and wisdom hidden in her heart. Aaliyah had memorized the entire 30th juz of the Quran and had just graduated with honors from the psychology department at McGill University. That Friday evening, she was invited to be a guest on a national talk show hosted by none other than Ivian Sanders, a renowned figure in Canadian journalism. Ivian, 42, was not only famous but feared in media circles. She held a PhD in communication from the University of Montreal. Known for her sharp tongue, eloquence, and uncompromising attitude, her talk show often tackled uncomfortable social topics, frequently turning religious beliefs into fiery debates. The topic that evening, faith in the modern era. Is faith still relevant today? When the cameras started rolling and the smooth studio lights flooded the modern set, the atmosphere seemed calm. The audience, made up of intellectuals, skeptics, and university students, waited in anticipation. Ivian leaned forward and turned to her guests, addressing Aaliyah. You're a graduate of one of Canada's top universities. You live in a free and modern society, and yet you choose to wear the hijab. Not only that, but you've memorized an ancient book in its entirety. Don't you think this is somewhat outdated for today's generation? The question was sharp as a blade wrapped in silk. The studio fell silent. Aaliyah raised her eyes. Her gaze was steady, and her expression didn't change. She smiled gently, almost as if she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. Interesting question, Dr. Ivian, she said quietly. But let me ask you a counter-question. Does freedom of thought mean the denial of all truths that come from God? There was a shift in the room. The silence deepened. Ivian blinked, clearly not expecting such a calm and composed counter-question. She nodded, intrigued. Please explain, she said. Aaliyah did not begin with statistics or historical facts, but with her own story. She told them about the silence of her teenage nights, the emptiness she once felt, even while surrounded by technology, education, and social freedom. She shared how she would lie on her bed at 2 a.m., asking, "Who am I? Why do I live?" She talked about how she turned to books on Western philosophy and psychology, even nihilism, until one day, in true desperation, she opened the Quran, not out of duty but out of a deep hunger for truth. And at that moment, the studio changed. The light no longer seemed like studio lighting. The presence of the cameras disappeared. The audience leaned forward, their faces softened. They were no longer watching a show. They were witnessing something rare, a truth spoken with love. But Ivian wasn't done. She leaned back, raising an eyebrow. How can a book revealed 1,400 years ago still be relevant today? We live in the age of artificial intelligence, neuroscience, and therapy. Don't you feel constrained by religious dogmas? Aaliyah nodded, as if expecting this. Her response was calm yet firm. I also studied psychology, Dr. Ivian. I read Freud, Jung, Carl Rogers. But every time I delved deeply into their theories, I found parallels in the verses of the Quran that discussed human trauma, emotions, healing, and even cognitive models of behavior, centuries before modern psychology was born. She paused. I don't feel constrained by Islam. I feel free because Islam does not ask me to be blind. It asks me to think, to doubt, to seek knowledge, and it teaches me how to heal. At that moment, something changed in Ivian. The sharp, quick-witted media personality fell silent. She looked at Aaliyah not as an opponent, but as someone genuinely trying to understand. For the first time, the layers of the media persona cracked. She seemed vulnerable. Then came the question that electrified the room. If Islam is as beautiful as you say, why is it so misunderstood? Aaliyah sighed, and her voice remained soft. People judge Islam by what some Muslims do, but you cannot judge a medicine by those who misuse it. You need to study the source, the Quran, the life of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, not the headlines in the newspapers. A few months later, a middle-aged woman pressed her hand to her chest, tears welling up in her eyes. The producer, watching from behind the camera, whispered to the crew, "Don't stop filming. This is a story." And then Ivian dropped the bombshell. "My father," she said softly, "was once a Muslim. He married my Catholic mother and left Islam. I grew up without religion. I pursued science, logic, success, but I was always afraid. Afraid of death, of loneliness, of silence." Her voice trembled. "I fill my life with interviews, with confidence, with public image, but the nights are still empty." The room went silent. It wasn't just quiet. There was a sense of awe. Aaliyah didn't intervene. She simply looked at Ivian with compassion, like a sister waiting for her brother or sister to finally come home. "You are not alone," Aaliyah said. "We are all searching, but not everyone admits they are lost. I admire your courage." That night, something changed. Ivian was no longer just a talk show host. She was no longer a public figure. She was just a woman who had finally admitted she was tired of hiding. "Then teach me," Ivian whispered. "Not here, not now," Aaliyah replied. "Show me through your actions, not through debates, but through light." And so, the story ended not with applause or a closing line, but with a promise. Outside, as the autumn leaves danced in the wind, two women sat in a quiet car. No lights, no cameras, just two hearts, one seeking, the other guiding. That night, the journey began. The city lights of Toronto flickered outside the black sedan parked near the studio, but inside, a different light began to shine. There were no cameras, no audience. Only Aaliyah and Ivian, sitting side by side, two women from different worlds, now connected by a shared moment of vulnerability. Ivian looked out the window, her fingers gripping the seatbelt tightly. Her voice was soft, like a child confessing a long-held secret. "I've rejected religion for as long as I can remember," she said. "Not just Islam, all religions, because I was afraid. Afraid that if I surrendered to faith, I would lose control over my life." Aaliyah gently turned to her. Her eyes were full of understanding. "I understand," she said. "I used to be afraid too. Afraid that faith meant losing my identity. But I found the opposite. Islam didn't erase me. It helped me meet my true self." A soft silence descended. Then Ivian's gaze fell on a small, dark green Quran in Aaliyah's hands. "Can you read something?" she asked, hesitantly. Aaliyah nodded. She didn't choose the verse randomly. Her fingers moved instinctively, guided by her heart. She opened the mushaf in the middle and read in a soft, melodic voice, "Those who have believed and whose hearts find rest in the remembrance of Allah. Verily, in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest." Quran, Surah Ar-Raid, 13:28. When she finished, Ivian didn't say a word. A single tear rolled down her cheek and silently fell to her lap. There were no sobs, no trembling. Only the silence that comes when something deep within finally finds its resonance. "I don't know why," Ivian whispered, "but this verse, it feels like it was written just for me." Aaliyah closed the Quran gently. Because Allah knew you would need it tonight. Ivian slowly nodded. She wasn't sure where all this would lead. She only knew that her heart had heard something it had longed for, but she still had doubts. I still have doubts, she said. I can't just believe in one night. What if I'm just being emotional? What if this is just a moment of weakness? Aliyah smiled. It's okay. Islam doesn't require instant belief. It requires sincerity. And if you're sincerely seeking, Allah will guide you. Her questions were not a problem, but silence and confusion were what hurt her heart. They sat in silence for almost 2 hours, without sermons, without arguments. Just an honest conversation. Ivian shared stories about her childhood, her father who quietly prayed in the basement, and an old prayer mat hidden in the closet. She recalled the faint echoes of the azan from his phone at sunset, little things she had buried deeply in her memory. My father passed away when I was 16, Ivian quietly said. And after that, it felt like the roots of my life were ripped out. Aliyah gently took her hand. Maybe tonight, your soul will receive water again. The next few days passed quietly but meaningfully. Ivian invited Aliyah to her apartment, an elegant space filled with books on philosophy, communication, and psychology. But strangely, there were no holy books on the shelves, just a large empty space between rows of Western thinkers. Over a warm cup of tea, Ivian said, "There's one question that has always held me back." "What is it?" Aliyah asked. "People have abandoned me so many times in my life. Friends, family, colleagues. Every time I believe in someone, they leave. How can I trust in a God I can't see if I can't even trust people I can see?" Aliyah didn't respond immediately. She looked at her with sincerity. "The pain you carry is not small, but God is not like people. He does not leave. He does not die. He does not change his mind. But you have seen God through the wounds left by people, and God is nothing like those who hurt you." Her words fell like a bomb on a wound, but Ivian's heart was still struggling. "Then why does he allow pain?" Ivian asked, her voice suddenly rising. "Why do children die in gas attacks? Why are women raped in war zones? If he's so loving, where is his love?" Aliyah sighed deeply. The question was heavy. She had heard it many times, but hearing it from Ivian, someone vulnerable, someone searching, was even harder. "This world is not paradise, Ivian," Aliyah said slowly. "It is a place of trials, for those who suffer and for those who witness suffering. God judges us not by the tragedies we face, but by how we respond. Evil exists because this is a world of choice. And without choice, there would be no meaning in faith, no beauty, and no goodness." Ivian fell silent, her breathing deep. Her mind was racing. After that, she spoke less, but when Aliyah stood to leave, Ivian quietly said, "I want to try reading the Quran, not just in English. I want to learn the Arabic letters." Aliyah's eyes lit up. "Of course," she said. "I'll teach you." And so, a new chapter began. Every day, Ivian practiced one letter, one word, one verse at a time. She wasn't in a hurry. She wasn't trying to convert her. She was trying to understand with her heart. But the outside world didn't understand this transformation. In her professional circles, rumors began to spread. Colleagues whispered that Ivian was going through a crisis. Some media sponsors expressed concern. Even her show's director called her in for a private meeting. "You're a public figure," he warned. "Bringing up religious topics, especially Islam, could harm your brand. You need to stay neutral." Ivian's voice was calm. "Neutral to what?" "We're just concerned," the director replied. "People might stop trusting you. If people only trust my fake version, Ivian said. Then maybe they never truly trusted me at all. Meanwhile, Alia also began to feel the pressure. She received messages accusing her of corrupting public figures. Some of her own Muslim friends began to criticize her for being too friendly with a non-Muslim. But she remained calm. It wasn't about popularity. It was about guiding a soul. When the University of Maghrib invited Alia to speak at a seminar called Faith and Modernity, she agreed and surprised everyone by asking, "Could Ivian join me as a guest?" "Why me?" Ivian asked. "Because you're doing the most honest search I've ever seen," Alia replied. "Your story isn't over yet, and people need to hear it." But neither of them knew what storm was coming. The night before the seminar, Ivian received a message on her phone. Just 6 words, "I know who your father was." The second message contained an old photo of a man standing near a small mosque, with a peace symbol on his eye and holding a prayer mat. It was her father. Her fingers trembled, and her breath quickened. She called Alia with a shaking voice. "Someone knows about my father, about me. They're watching me." On the other end of the line, Alia's voice became serious. "Ivian, I need to tell you something. The night air in Toronto was unusually cold, but it wasn't the temperature that made Ivian's hands tremble. It was the message glowing on her phone screen." She couldn't move for a moment, stunned in disbelief. How could anyone know this? She had buried this part of her past so deeply that she almost convinced herself it had never existed. And now it was unexpectedly and inexplicably surfacing. Panicked, she called Alia. Her voice trembled. "Someone knows about my father, about me studying Islam. I don't know what's happening." On the other end of the line, she heard a chair creak. Alia's voice grew firm, but serious. "Tell me exactly what the message said." Ivian repeated the words without taking her eyes off the photo. A long pause followed. Then Alia spoke, her voice quieter than before. "Ivian, I have to tell you something I haven't told you about your father." The next morning, they met in the university library, but not for their seminar rehearsal. It was something much more personal, something buried under layers of silence and time. Alia brought a warm brown folder full of yellowing documents, old newspaper clippings, and a few photographs. She carefully placed it on the table between them and looked Ivian in the eyes. "Your father," she began, "was not just a convert to Islam. He was a promising scholar. He converted to Islam, participated in a master's program in Cairo, and not only that, he studied under some of the greatest Islamic scholars of that time and became prominent in Cairo. My father never told me anything. He always said his time abroad was purely academic," Ivian said. Alia opened the folder, showing faded photographs of a young man standing inside Al-Azhar University, taking notes during a lecture, smiling in the courtyard next to a group of Middle Eastern students. "This is him," Alia confirmed. "Your father was my uncle or a close friend." Ivian sat motionless, her body feeling empty. "Why didn't he tell me? Why did he hide this from us?" Alia sighed. "Because he was being watched. When he returned to Canada, some people thought he had brought back dangerous ideology, even though he never preached it publicly. The pressure and threats broke him. He remained silent to protect your family. He didn't want to put your life in danger." Ivian felt the world sway beneath her. All her life, she had searched for identity through science, intellect, and appearances. Her father had already walked the path she was just beginning to tread. "So this isn't a coincidence," she whispered. "Meeting you, my return to the Quran. It's all the trace he left." Tears welled up in her eyes, but this time it wasn't just sadness. It was something deeper. Grief for the life she could have known and a profound realization that nothing in her journey had been random. Alia gently placed her hand on hers. Sometimes the truth doesn't bring comfort right away, but it brings clarity. And then we start to become whole. The next day, the seminar went as planned. The atmosphere in the auditorium was charged. Professors, students, and even journalists came to hear the lecture titled Faith in a Rapidly Changing World. Alia stood on stage, and Ivian sat in the back, dressed in a black blazer and simple scarf. She didn't feel ready to speak. Not today. But she was there, silently absorbing every word Alia said. Alia spoke not with passion, but with conviction. She talked about the misconception that faith and intellect were enemies, about how faith was not a retreat from logic, but a step toward deeper understanding. She didn't mention Ivian by name, but every sentence was a silent letter addressed to her. At the end of the session, a professor approached Ivian. "You were supposed to speak today, weren't you?" he asked kindly. Ivian smiled weakly. "Maybe not today. I'm still learning." The professor nodded thoughtfully. "Keep learning. Sometimes the search is more important than the answer." However, that night, the real storm came. At 11 p.m., Ivian received an official letter from the editorial team of the media company where she worked. "We have received a report about your involvement in unauthorized religious activities. Due to your public position and in order to maintain the organization's neutrality, your contract is under review." She read the letter over and over. It didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a door slowly closing. She quietly closed her laptop and went out to the balcony with a view of the city. The cold air pierced her skin, but it was nothing compared to the cold inside her. She whispered to herself, "If I keep searching, I will lose my world, but if I stop now, I will lose my soul." Behind her, a familiar voice broke the silence. "Then let's not stop." Alia stood in the doorway, wrapped in a warm coat, her calm presence before the approaching storm. "You came," Ivian whispered. "I felt that you needed someone tonight." Ivian looked at the horizon. "I don't know what to choose. I'll lose the world I've built if I go back. But if I stop now, I'll lose that part of myself that finally feels alive." Alia moved closer. "The world can be rebuilt, Ivian, but your conscience, if you lose it, it will be much harder to find again." Ivian turned to her, her eyes filled with fear and longing. "I'm afraid of becoming a stranger in a world that once accepted me." Alia smiled. Even Prophet Ibrahim was a stranger, even to his own father. But he was chosen, and perhaps you are too. As soon as the wind picked up, a new storm came, not from the outside, but from the networks. A video clip leaked online showing Eveline at a private Islamic study group, where she struggled to pronounce Arabic letters. Her voice was soft, her focus sincere. The internet exploded. Some praised her honesty, while others mercilessly attacked her. People questioned her mental state, her authority, her intentions. Sponsors pulled out. Colleagues sent cold messages. Headlines buzzed with speculation. Yet, amidst the digital chaos, Ivian quietly posted a message on her official account. "I am searching for the light. If that means I lose the stage, let me go into the shadows as long as my heart remains alive." The post was shared thousands of times. Many mocked her. Many cried. But through it all, one thing became clear. Her journey was no longer just her own. 2 weeks had passed since the viral video of Saif Lylan Sanders. 2 weeks of fiery storms on social media. 2 weeks of cold glances at work. questions she couldn't answer. Messages from fans who felt betrayed and messages from strangers who whispered, "Thank you. You said what's in our hearts." She didn't respond to any of them. Her world, once structured and clear, now seemed shattered, like transparent glass. She was no longer afraid of the questions. She feared the lies that demanded silence. Every time she recalled the verse from the Quran that Alia had read in the car, "Indeed, in the remembrance of Allah, hearts find peace," it echoed deeper and deeper within her. She was beginning to understand. But one mystery still haunted her. The messages about her father stopped. The sender was still unknown, but began to send old audio recordings in Arabic. Ivian didn't fully understand the language yet, but she recognized the voice. It was his voice, her father's voice. In one of the clips, his words were clearer than ever. "If you ever find the truth, do not keep it only for your own safety. A life built on silence is the loneliest of deaths." And that was when she made her decision. She would no longer live in silence. She quit her job. The resignation letter was short, professional, without drama. But the moment she clicked send, she felt a heavy weight lift from her chest. Many people called her afterward. Some begged her to reconsider. Others mocked her for giving up a brilliant career for religion. And some asked, "Can't you just be spiritual without changing your whole life?" But Ivian now knew that true faith doesn't allow you to live halfway. It wasn't about changing everything, but about finally becoming whole. She immersed herself in studying Islam, quietly and sincerely. She signed up for online courses with female teachers from around the world. She began memorizing short surahs, slowly studying tajweed. One night, when she flawlessly recited Surah Al-Fatiha for the first time, she burst into tears. She wasn't reading a book. She was meeting her Creator. Time seemed to fold. Her days became richer even without accolades or applause. She no longer felt empty. She felt herself being rebuilt, word by word, verse by verse. Then one day an email arrived. It was from an elderly woman in Egypt, claiming to be the sister of her father's former teacher. "Your father left something here," the letter said. "Something meant only for you if you decide to follow his path." At first, Ivian hesitated. Was it real? Was it safe? But Alia gently encouraged her. "Maybe this isn't just a trip," she said. "Maybe it's the chapter you were always meant to write." So Ivian flew to Cairo. The journey was not only geographical but emotional. With every mile separating her from Toronto, she felt herself moving further away from who she had been and closer to who she was meant to become. The air in Cairo was warm and rich with stories. She arrived at a modest home in the old part of the city, where the woman greeted her with an embrace that felt familiar. "You have his eyes," the woman whispered. She led Ivian through the narrow hallways of the house into a small, quiet room at the end. In the corner stood an old wooden cabinet, locked and untouched for years. The woman handed Ivian a silver key, polished by time. "Your father said," she told her, "if his child ever comes to seek this key belongs to them." Ivian's hands trembled as she turned the key in the lock. Inside the cabinet lay several items wrapped in cloth. She opened them one by one. An old prayer mat, faded and soft, photographs of her father teaching in a mosque, a handwritten note in Arabic, a small wooden box sealed with tape. She opened the box, and inside was a long letter in English addressed to her. "Dear daughter living," her breath caught in her throat. She sank to the floor, tears already streaming down her cheeks as she unfolded the letter. Her father wrote about his days in Cairo, the books that opened his mind, and the verses that changed his soul. He wrote about the joy of embracing Islam and the bitterness of hiding it. "I wanted to tell you and your mother," he wrote, "but the world was too harsh. I chose safety, and I regret it." He described how he kept his Quran under the cabinet, how he quietly played the call to prayer on his phone at Maghrib, just to feel something familiar. "I died with a heavy heart," the letter said, "not because I doubted Islam, but because I left you without it." And finally, at the bottom of the letter, he wrote words that Ivian would carry with her for the rest of her life. "Do not fear walking alone in search of truth, even if walking in silence. It is enough to have the truth as your companion." She stayed in the room for several hours, sitting there, holding the letter, feeling her father's words as an embrace across time. When she returned to Toronto, she was no longer the same woman. She was no longer the TV star trying to maintain her image. Now, she was a seeker who had become a messenger. She wasn't rushing back into the spotlight. Instead, she created a small YouTube channel from her apartment, with simple decor, a chair, warm light, a quiet heart. She named the channel Soul Map, not because she claimed to have all the answers, but because she wanted to share the compass that had guided her out of darkness. She didn't preach or argue. She simply told stories about the questions no one dared to ask, about the loneliness behind public success, about how sometimes truth comes not with thunder, but with a whisper. Gradually, people began to find her. One by one, comments came in. "I felt that same emptiness. Your voice sounds like healing. I haven't embraced Islam yet, but I've started reading the Quran." Her channel didn't go viral. It grew slowly, like a seed watered in secret, but her stories touched people. People who, like her, were seeking, trying to hear. A year later, something unexpected happened. TEDx Toronto invited her to speak. She stood on a stage that once felt like a place of exile, no longer as a celebrity, no longer as a journalist, but as a woman who had stepped away from the world to protect her soul. She spoke simply, "I used to think identity was a mask, something you wear until people like you. But identity isn't a costume. It's light, and you only see it when you dare to be honest with yourself." And then she said what only someone who had lost everything could say. Truth might make you lose the stage, but it gives you something greater, peace. And that peace is worth everything. She returned home that night, carefully hung her scarf behind the door, sat on her prayer mat, and smiled at the Quran she now understood, verse by verse. She no longer chased love or fame. She chased the light, and that light finally led her home. The sky over Toronto that day was overcast, as though nature itself was holding its breath. A year had passed since Ivian Sanders left the spotlight. A year since she turned away from fame to follow a much more uncertain, but infinitely more real path. Her YouTube channel, Soul Map, continued to grow, slowly, quietly, not in the number of subscribers but in its influence. Every video touched hearts. Every word spoken came from the depth of her soul. She no longer tried to be someone else. She was finally herself. But one part of her journey still remained unresolved. The mystery of her father's past, a riddle that led her to Cairo, the letter that changed her life, was still known only to her close circle. Somehow, she knew that this final piece had to be confronted face to face. And then it happened. A private message came from a woman claiming to be a distant relative, someone who had known her father before he married Ivian's Catholic mother. She had kept something, the last audio recording, a message that had never been delivered. When Ivian opened the file, the sound was old and crackling, but clear enough to make her freeze. "My dear Eli Vine, If this ever reaches you, it means you have found what I was too afraid to share. I always hoped, even though I was unable to guide you, that Allah would do it. Perhaps now you walk alone, but know that I walk with you in every verse you read, in every bow you make. Forgive me for my silence. May your courage redeem mine. That night, Ivian sat for a long time on her prayer mat. No tears, only silence. Then she understood that some stories are not meant to be kept secret. Some stories must be told, not to attract attention, but for truth, for closure, for healing. And so, with Alia by her side, she made the most important decision of her life, to publicly embrace Islam. Not in front of a crowd, not on live TV, but in a small, quiet mosque on the outskirts of the city, with only a few close friends, 2 witnesses, and a heart ready to surrender. The air inside the mosque was peaceful, the softness wrapping around her like a blanket. She stepped forward, nervous but calm, and the imam smiled warmly and handed her the microphone. Alia stood beside her, holding her hand. "Are you ready, Ivian?" She nodded. Her eyes sparkled, but her voice was steady. "Ashhadu alla ilaha illallah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu." The declaration echoed softly off the walls, and thus, the woman who once ruled Canadian media with her sharp tongue, declared before angels and people that her heart belonged to something much greater than applause. Tears streamed down her face as Alia embraced her tightly, whispering, "Welcome home, sister." After the prayer, Ivian sat quietly with her Quran, the same one that Kalfi had gifted her on their first night in the car. She gently kissed it and whispered, "You found me when I couldn't find myself." But as in all journeys of light, darkness was not far behind. The media storm hit harder than ever. The tabloids speculated. Former colleagues wrote scathing articles. Headlines screamed from primetime to the daily prayers. What happened to Ivian Sanders? Journalist or jihadist? How did a Canadian icon fall into the hands of religious extremism? The accusations were painful and at times deeply personal. Some people who had once called her a role model now branded her a traitor. Doors kept closing. Invitations disappeared. Even friendships evaporated without explanation. But Ivian was no longer afraid of rejection. She had already found acceptance with the one who truly mattered. "I haven't lost anything," she said one evening, sipping tea by the window. "I've just made room for something better." Her mother, though initially silent and distant, began to slowly soften. She started asking questions. One evening, flipping through an old photo album of her husband, she whispered, "Maybe I never really knew the man I loved." Ivian took her hand and said, "Maybe now we can learn about him together." She didn't push. She just loved her. And sometimes, love is the greatest duo of all. Months passed. One spring evening, Ivian stood on stage again, but not in a TV studio. She was at an interfaith women's conference, wearing a simple dark blue dress and a soft cream hijab. Her speech was simple, humble. Faith doesn't erase your scars. Teaches you to wear them with dignity. I used to seek applause. Now I seek peace. My father taught me with his silence. And now I speak to honor the voice he never used. The audience gave her a standing ovation, not for fame, but for the raw, real beauty of truth. The following week, her Soul Map channel received thousands of letters, but one stood out. It was from a young woman in Vancouver. "I'm an agnostic, but something in your words makes me want to pray again. I don't know why, but I feel less lonely." For Ivian, that was enough. A year later, she sat in her small apartment, now transformed into a cozy workspace. She had learned several surahs, including Al-Fatiha, Al-Ikhlas, and Ar-Rahman. The Quran was no longer just a book on her desk. It had become the map of her heart. One quiet night, after her tahajjud prayer, she opened the letter from her late father. At the bottom of the page, in barely visible ink, was a phrase she had never noticed before. "Truth will not make you popular, but it will make you whole." She smiled, closed the letter, and whispered, "Now I am whole, Dad." And though he was no longer alive, it felt as though he smiled back, because sometimes, the prayers we whisper in fear are answered through the children we leave behind. Epilogue. If you are watching this and your heart is still searching, if you are surrounded by people but feel lonely in your soul, if your nights are silent but your thoughts are loud, remember that you are not alone. This channel, Legacy of Islam, is not a platform for answers. It's a space for questions, for honesty, for hearts that still dare to hope. We walk not because we are perfect, but because we refuse to remain lost. Keep walking, keep asking, keep reaching. The light is always waiting.